I'm 33 years old, and I came to the United States as a refugee when I was 11. I was born in what is now the former Soviet Union, what's now Ukraine, and because of my family's religious background, we're Jewish, we were faced with religious discrimination in the former Soviet Union. As an 11-year-old, I may not remember very much about that immediate experience, but I do know that having come to the United States as a refugee and becoming a US citizen several years later definitely affected and impacted my life in many ways. And I'm very grateful for having had this opportunity to come to the United States, to become an American citizen, and to take advantage of all of the freedoms and opportunities that life in the US has to offer. It was both. It was certainly an adjustment. As I said, I was 11 years old. I was in 6th grade, and I went to public school in the Boston area where my family settled. I didn't speak much English at first, and it was a little bit tough. You go to classes and you go, you sit in class, you listen to teachers lecture and tell you to do assignments that you don't necessarily pick up on right away. And I was actually lucky enough because in my school, there were both a lot of students who spoke Russian, which is my native language, students who came from the same background that I came from. There was also a bilingual education program, which was very nice because there were so many immigrant students. And the bilingual education program allowed me to take an hour out of each school day to leave my regular classroom and go work with a Russian-speaking teacher who helped bring me up to speed on what the teacher in my regular classroom was asking us to do. So would say I was fully fluent in English. And, it had mostly to do with the fact that I was immersed in an English-speaking environment, and the same things were demanded of me as of all other students. I had a little additional support, which helped me a great deal. But that adjustment period, I would say, was probably about 5 or 6 months. And the toughest part was just being able to understand what was demanded of me, being able to interact with teachers, with students, having the student population, the teachers who were very welcoming, very understanding, and very helpful, did help a great deal. I'll give you maybe one example of how I saw that transition kind of happening on a day-to-day basis. My 6th grade teacher had these math quizzes that she would give us every week. We would take a quiz once a week. She would see where each one of us is, and the next week she'd test us again. So obviously the first week I couldn't answer, I could barely answer any of the questions because most of the problems were word problems, and I didn't understand a lot of the words. And in fact, where I had come from, math was taught at a fairly high level, so I knew math well, but I couldn't understand what the word problems were asking me. And, I got very low scores on the first few quizzes. And then within a matter of weeks and maybe a month or two, once I figured out what the problem was asking, I started getting perfect scores on these quizzes. And very quickly, the teachers and other students realized this is not someone who doesn't understand math. This is someone who has a language barrier. When it's overcome, in my case, it was overcome quite quickly. He can do the work, he understands the subject matter, so it's just a matter of getting the opportunity to learn the language to answer those questions. So for me, that was, a fairly quick transition. I do remember that, being Jewish in the former Soviet Union was not unusual, but it was not particularly welcoming. Mm-hmm. And clearly in the United States, you don't have the same stigma with being part of a religious minority because this country was founded on the basis of religious freedom. Mm-hmm. So the fact that there were, a number of experiences, and I was young and I didn't experience many of them directly, but my family did. The fact that I was able to come to the US and practice my religion freely, express myself freely on any number of topics, engage in all the rights that American citizens are given by the Constitution. It's something that I actually think about every day because these are not rights and these are not freedoms that we should take for granted. This is something that, coming from a place where such freedoms don't exist, you very quickly realize just how precious they are. In the US, I was able to take advantage of a wonderful education system. I went through public schools. I had an excellent experience in my school career, I was able to go to college. I was able to choose the field that I wanted to study. Maybe I would not have had this freedom had I not come to the United States. I was able to have a double major in political science and in economics, and when I was an undergraduate, and that helped me kind of shape the professional path that I set myself on after that. For the last 8 years, I've worked for the World Bank. I'm an economist at the World Bank. And in my day-to-day work, what I do is I work with countries, usually low-income or middle-income countries, that are trying to improve their policies and help their populations. And my field specifically is education policy. And the reason that I feel very passionate about this work is because the mission of my organization is to help countries combat poverty and to help them build shared prosperity, to make sure that all of their citizens benefit from economic growth and economic opportunity. And the fact that I chose this career is not an accident. The fact that I came to this country as a refugee, and as many others who have come to the United States as refugees and economic migrants, I see that government policies very much shape individual well-being, community well-being. So the fact that I decided to go into this line of work, and I felt very strongly about needing to do this kind of work, to work with other countries, to help other countries build better policies for their populations, is very much aligned to the fact that I had this experience in my own past. It resonates very much. And the current situation, the fact that we have the highest levels of refugee populations in the world since the end of World War II, hits very close to home. I see a lot of myself in, the refugees that you see trying to make their way across Europe, trying to make their way to the United States, to Canada, to other countries. I see myself in those refugee children. And for people in this country who don't necessarily identify with those experiences, because the vast majority of us have not been through these experiences, I think the most important question that I would ask my fellow Americans is what does a refugee look like? Maybe you would be surprised to know that I was at one point in my life a refugee. I'm a white guy with glasses and a suit and tie. To you, maybe that's not what a refugee looks like, but a refugee can look like any of us. And the fact that at one point, any one of us can become a refugee for reasons very much outside of our control, should, I hope, lead us to be more empathetic or more generous and more welcoming towards those of us who at any one point need refuge, need assistance. Yes, refugees do come to this country, and non-refugee migrants come to this country with needs. Some are economic needs, some are psychological or emotional needs. Some need nothing more than the opportunity to work. And the fact that America for centuries has been the land of that opportunity is something that's very important to me. It's something that's very important to my family. And I hope that Americans and others who watch this video realize that refugees are just like us, who for one reason or another had to leave their home. Most left because it was something outside of their control. And refugees, just because they have some need, let's say economic need at one point in their life, doesn't mean that they will forever be in need. In fact, as I think my example shows, and many other refugees, the majority of refugees would show you, when given the opportunity, refugees can be fully functional members of society, can become Americans, can become American citizens, can become taxpayers, can become contributors to this country. I've been paying my taxes for many, many years. I'm very proud to be an American and a taxpayer and a voter. And I think that's something that any refugee who's given the opportunity would welcome to do. So I think we should keep that in mind. The most important thing to keep in mind is that as the generation of future decision makers who will make policies that affect refugees and make economic decisions that affect refugees and migrants for decades to come, young people need to keep in mind that what they do today, what their country and their society does today, will be viewed through a lens of history. Many of us were lucky enough to be granted asylum, to be welcomed by a country that was welcoming to migrants and welcoming to refugees. And many years down the road, I look back and I say, this is a country that welcomed me. This is a country that was good to me. This is a country of which I feel proud to be a part of, and to which I want to give back, and which I would want to defend in time of war. And I think young people who understand that when these decisions are made, in the present moment, become a lifelong American and a proud lifelong American. So the fact that the vast majority of refugees these days are young people, whether they're children or young adults, means that they still have their whole lives ahead of them. So the fact that welcoming a young person and maybe welcoming them into our communities and into our education systems allows us to help them become Americans. Not all refugees would want to stay in the US forever. Many would want to go back to their own country when the danger has passed. But many would want to remain in the US and become Americans. And I think, especially when it comes to migrants and refugees who are young, we have an opportunity to really welcome them at an age when they're still forming who they are. And at a younger age, refugees and migrants do form stronger ties and stronger allegiances to the country that welcomes them than at an older age. So I think it's important for us not to turn our back on these refugees, especially those who are young and vulnerable among them. And with one thought, when I was your age, when I was a little younger than you, let's say I was 13 or somewhere around there, we had a unit in my school in our social studies class on the Holocaust. And in my school, there were a lot of Jewish students, so for many of them, it was personally relevant. But even for non-Jewish students, the unit on World War II, and specifically as it affected vulnerable populations, was eye-opening in many cases. And this was the mid to late 90s. And many of us thought, even those of us whose families were personally affected by the Holocaust, many of us thought, oh, this is ancient history. This is not something that will ever impact my life. I can learn about it from the point of view of, historical fact. It's in the textbook. I know the facts. Great. I think we're living in an era today where we're once again being asked to make the kinds of decisions that people had to make all those years ago. And I think it's up to each and every one of us to ask ourselves, if we're faced with a tough decision, with a life or death decision, with a decision that could save another person's life, how would we react? So, this is not ancient history. We face this every day. So I leave you with that thought.